On February 16, 2023, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni stated that her government, unfortunately my government too, intended to go after human smugglers, not only in Italy, but worldwide. In an interview, she described her approach as a war without mercy on those responsible for smuggling migrants. She described her approach as a strategy to operate across the globe in order to dismantle the smuggling networks that, in her view, exploit vulnerable people and endanger their lives. Now, this is a picture of Osama al-Masri. Now, Osama al-Masri is a Libyan national whose recent story has hit the headlines of newspaper all over the world. So you may have come across his a story already. I mean, it has stirred fierce criticism against the way Italian authorities, including the government of Meloni, has dealt with the case. Why is that? So who is al-Masri? Al-Masri is the head of the Tripoli branch of the Reform and Rehabilitation Institution. This organization oversees several detention centers, including the notorious Mitiga prison in Libya. Now, Mitiga is not just any detention facility. It's a key site that has become infamous over the course of the past years for severe human rights abuses. There are multiple investigations and reports, including by the UN, that have documented appalling practices within Mitiga's wall, such as torture, sexual violence, killings, so on and so forth. Now, often targeting migrants and asylum seekers who have passed through Libya on their way to Europe. The ICC, the International Criminal Court, had been chasing al-Masri on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity, accusing al-Masri of direct involvement in these abuses and also abuses committed within the Mitiga prison since at least 2015. Al-Masri was arrested a couple of weeks ago, a bit less, in Turin, in Italy, during a football match between Juventus and Milan, for those who are interested. And at first sight, his arrest was seen as a breakthrough moment, an opportunity to finally hold the key figure of this criminal business, of the very criminal business that Prime Minister Meloni wanted to, is trying to put down, accountable for what he has done. Finally, we have managed to reach our hands to catch not the small fishes, but the so-called big fishes. However, despite everything, al-Masri was freed due to mysterious legal technicality right after being arrested. And al-Masri was subsequently returned to Libya. Now, needless to say, this decision drew significant condemnation, not only from the ICC, but also from human rights groups who pointed to Italy's legal obligations to cooperate with international justice mechanisms. Interestingly enough, the ICC, at least internal sources within the ICC, have already expressed concern that Italy may release al-Masri even before being de facto released. So why the ICC expressed these concerns, let's say, in advance? Well, these concerns become clear when we consider the broader role of Libyan detention centers like Mitiga, not only in Italy, but also more broadly in the European Union migration agenda. As a transit country, Libya is a critical choke point on migration routes from sub-Saharan Africa, even Asia, toward Europe. Many migrants passing through Libya find themselves intercepted and detained in facilities such as Mitiga. Mitiga is just one of them. These detention centers often operate in, let's say, murky legal and political waters, with allegations that some officials running them, including individuals like al-Masri, have ties to smuggling and trafficking networks and criminal gangs. Now, al-Masri case is not an isolated case. In recent years, international organizations and media outlets have documented many instances of how the operations of migrant smugglers, human traffickers, even drug traffickers intersect with migration flow and migration management. And not only in Italy, and not only in the Mediterranean, but across the entire globe. So, for example, not so long ago, the Australian government was accused of reversal smuggling for paying the smugglers to shuttle back their customers to the country of origin, or well, or to the transit countries, at least from where the smugglers departed. Of course, it can be argued that these are still isolated cases. Al-Masri, Australia, this is not the norm. But let me ask you a question. Have you ever considered how the European asylum system actually works? Well, the EU law does not allow for the regulated arrival of asylum seekers. This basically means that asylum seekers generally need human smugglers to enter the EU territory and file an asylum claim. What all this tells us is that the European asylum system, the very crucial element of what makes us proud of being European, of Europe as a beacon of liberal value, well, that very cog in this self-perception of being superior, morally speaking, well, is fundamentally reliant on criminal practices to function. So the key question here is therefore not whether there is a criminal encroachment on migration governance, but what this criminal encroachment tells us about the nature of migration governance at large. And today I want to answer this question. However, an answer to these questions require a radical inversion of perspective. Now, traditionally, we are accustomed to see criminal groups, criminal actors, or criminal phenomena as social diseases, social illness that somehow interfere, disrupt the proper functioning of, in this case, of migration governance or transnational governance at large. But now we are specifically talking of migration governance, right? So something that hinder the proper functioning. Now, these groups are perceived to grow fast, grow big, and to overcome states' attempt to control, to put them down, despite Giorgia Meloni's serious attempts to do that. What I would like you here to do is an inversion of perspective. Instead of perceiving criminal actors only as threats to be addressed by national and international entities, I think it is crucial to recognize them as key players within the domain of transnational migration governance. Now, their role, the role of these actors, of these criminal groups, often extend beyond mere disruptions, of simply just being disruptors, actively influencing migration governance and at times even playing a critical role in the functioning of key dimensions of its legal apparatus, such as, for example, the asylum system. So in what follow, what I will show is that criminal actors, or I'll try to do so at least, shape migration governance. And I will do so by focusing on the role of migrant smugglers and human traffickers in the European Union's externalization of border control to third countries. And well, a good place to look at these dynamics is Libya. Now, in recent years, the European Union has significantly shifted its approach toward managing migration, notably through externalizing its migration control mechanisms. A crucial moment in this strategy still is, and will probably be in the future, the enhancement of cooperation with Libya, a key transit country for migrants seeking to reach Europe and place an asylum claim. The European Union, along with member states like Italy and Malta, has invested substantially in the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy, equipping and training them to intercept migrant boats attempting to cross the Mediterranean and return them to Libya. Just to give you an idea, by 2021, the EU's financial commitment to Libya amounted to roughly €500 million. including 60 million specifically for border and migration management. These investments included new search and rescue vessels and a maritime rescue coordination center supported by Italian equipment and vessels. Now, while these measures were ostensibly designed to save lives and curb irregular migration, in line with what Giorgia Meloni has claimed, they have also raised significant concerns regarding the unintended consequences, intended or unintended or intended. We'll get to that later on, particularly in the involvement of criminal groups in migration governance. The partnership, as we all know by now, the partnership with Libya has been at the center of a clear controversy. Reports, studies have highlighted suspected collaborations between Libyan authorities and criminal groups engaged in smuggling and trafficking. Al-Masri is just one of those people involved in these collaborations and interaction with Italian's governments, regardless the color of the government. Now, to understand this collaboration, we need to understand the complex political economy of post-revolutionary Libya. In Libya, militias and criminal groups have traditionally competed for control over lucrative economic activities, including migrant smuggling. EU externalization policies in Libya have changed this scenario. The influx of EU funds intended to stem the flow of migrants has created new opportunities for these groups. So aligning with anti-smuggling initiatives became a strategic opportunity for these criminal groups, allowing them to co-opt EU material and financial support while continuing their exploitation of migrants, actually by exacerbating their exploitation of migrants. So almost overnight, some of those actors who were deeply involved in smuggling migrants became, or at least pretended to be, an anti-smuggling actor. And this has led authors to say that what was a business of mobility became a business of mobility. Now, this is only partly true because human smuggling didn't cease to exist. But what happened was that exploitation of migrants consistently increased and changed what is migrant smuggling into what is human trafficking. Now, very quickly, I'm sure you're familiar with the difference between smuggling and trafficking, but very quickly, for those of you who are not, migrant smuggling involves migrants buying a service, which is the crossing of national borders, among many other things. So the migrants is a customer, the smugglers is a service providers. He can deceive migrants, but this actually is not the norm. In human trafficking, the migrants doesn't buy, it's not a customer, but it's the service that has been sold, borrowed, or anyway exploited by the traffickers. Now, the externalization measures implemented in Libya have turned what is migrant smuggling more into what is human trafficking. During an interview with a humanitarian activist in Libya, this person observed that smuggling and trafficking often overlap. The same people may be involved in both smuggling migrants out of Libya and exploiting them within the country. So what changed was the degree of exploitation migrants are facing now and the time they spend in Libya, which has increased considerably because the longer they stay in Libya, the more they can be exploited. So the containment of migrants became the main source of income. To an extent that migrants in Libya have been defined by authors as walking cash points. Now, we can discuss the extent of these criminal groups, as well as the type of interaction with migrants. As a matter of fact, they remain subject of debate. On one hand, studies suggest that this group operate as highly organized, extensive criminal networks engaged in exploiting migrants. On the other, some researchers advise caution in exaggerating the extent of these networks, highlighting their more ad hoc and individual-driven nature of the interaction between migrants and these criminal actors or criminalized actors. Now, what matters here, however, is that a vibrant market focused on the containment of migrants and the exploitation has flourished in Libya and largely due to the substantial amount of funds channeled through the EU. Amounts not only financial, but also in terms of social capital. So, against this background, detention centers in Libya, both official and unofficial, have emerged as key element in this containment strategy. Now, in this picture that you can see in this snapshot, this is a snapshot, this is an aerial view of one of these detention centers. Roughly speaking, we have two types of detention centers. We have informal detention centers and formal detention centers. Now, the formal detention centers are managed by authorities mostly, whereas informal detention centers, roughly speaking, only by criminal groups. What is interesting here is that even the so-called formal detention center, they are infiltrated is not the right word. They see interaction, they see the clear presence of criminal actors or actors like Al-Masri that have clear criminal links with organized criminal groups or disorganized criminal groups. And why this is important? This is important because, as a matter of fact, the blur line between formality and informality within these centers allow these entities to operate with impunity, exploiting migrants for profiting and leaving migrants without any capacity to appeal against their situation. Now, it's important to acknowledge that the proportion of migrants currently detained within these centers is only a fraction of the total migrant population in Libya. Informal estimates indicate that roughly 700,000 migrants, they are currently residing in Libya, at least as of early 2024. And most of these migrants reside in urban areas. However, only a very small fraction of these migrants' population finds themselves in either official or unofficial detention centers, such as, I think, 10,000 in total, if I'm not mistaken. However, what I would like to highlight here is that the impact of these policies and these centers extend beyond the immediate containment of migrants. The narrative of violence and exploitation has become a powerful deterrent, shaping migration patterns and influencing the decision of would-be migrants. So, for example, the stories of violence and atrocities committed and perpetrated within these centers circulate widely and quickly across the migrant communities. And as a matter of fact, many have now avoiding the Libya route altogether. The Libya route has gained the appellate of Tariq al-Maut, which is the death route, due to the high risk and fatality rate. So, in summary, the transition from smuggling towards human trafficking, or anyway, more exploitative practices, has significantly altered the experience of migrants in Libya, many of whom now are stuck in the country, or they avoid dangerous Libyan routes altogether. Now, while the long-term impact of this change in migration patterns remains controversial, its short-term effectiveness is actually evident. Despite the recent increase in arrivals via the central Mediterranean route, well, now we are witnessing again a decrease, externalization measures have generally curtailed departure following key agreements with Libya. Again, this is most likely a short-term outcome. Because, for example, we have observed a steep decline in maritime migration post-July 2017, right after the signing of the MOIU between Italy and Libya. And by 2021, the proportion of people attempting to leave Libya by boat and forcibly return to the country rose to from zero to over half of the total departures. Now, where I want to go with that? I think that Libya provides a clear illustration of the reproduction of what I define the legal apparatus of migration governance through criminal or criminalized groups and their actions. So in Libya, this process is not so much about creating new legal norms or producing a new legal framework, but rather about sustaining and actuating existing legal framework in a way that circumvents the inherent contradictions of this framework. Okay, let me explain you what I mean with that. But to do so, let me borrow a concept taken from Aiwa Ong, which is a concept of graduate sovereignty. Now, Aiwa Ong's work, I think, provide a useful analytical framework to understand these mechanisms. Now, Ong introduced the concept of graduate sovereignty to describe the different degrees of state control in Asia over different parts of national territory. Now, this leads to diverse legal frameworks within the same country, with some areas, like special, for example, administrative regions and free trade zones, that see reduced regulation and increased influence of non-state entities. Now, Ong's perspective reveals that states can achieve certain goals, such as economic development, even in areas where the normal rule of law is suspended. Now, let's try to translate this concept and adapt it to migration governance in Europe. The concept of graduated sovereignty can be applied to understand the EU's migration policy and its engagement with criminal groups. Just as Ong describes certain zones being subject to this distinct governance due to their global market rules, the European Union and its member states rely on a stratified system of border management where specific zones and routes are governed under different standards by different actors. And now this differential governance is clearly visible in Libya. In the case of Libya, by engaging with non-state actors, including militia and traffickers, the European Union effectively outsources its migration control mechanisms. The primary goal of externalization, as we all know, is to enable governments to contain migration flows and deter future migrants from undertaking irregular journeys. These strategies rationale become clear when considering Europe's asylum system, where refugees, in principle at least, are entitled to unique non-refoulement rights under both international and most national laws. Thus, if we shift migration control operation away from national borders, well, this action becomes a strategy, in this case by EU member states to escape the mandates of legal frameworks and the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. In this context, the collaboration between governments and criminal groups becomes a clear embodiment of externalization, underlying its foundational principles, the evasion of responsibilities and the uncompromising control of migration. It's important here, the evasion of responsibilities, because if you do, criminal groups, you cannot be accountable of, you cannot really be accountable of agreements with criminal groups because they operate in outside the rule of law. Now, two objections can be raised. Let me conclude with that. Two interrelated objections may be raised when focusing on this, let's say, on the symbiotic relationship between organized or between criminal groups and the state or supranational entities' interest in managing migration. The first one is, it may be argued that the idea of criminal groups enacting specific migration policies is simplistic, since there are plenty of instances where this does not occur. Second, it may be argued that the cooperation between the European Union and its state member is conspirational, since the European Union, normally operate within the rule of law. Now, regarding the first issue, migration governance, as we all know, involves a multitude of actors with evolving rules and differing agendas and interests. Indeed, if criminal activity is instrumental to the policies and practices enforced by specific stakeholders, it can be significantly disruptive to other stakeholders, or even to the same stakeholder at different temporal or geographical moment. Therefore, I have chosen to single out patterns of cooperation between criminal actors and the European Union simply to highlight how there may be also symbiotic relationships between stakeholders that are typically perceived as fundamentally opposed. However, I'm not suggesting a deterministic view of criminal influence, but rather highlighting patterns of interaction in specific contexts. The second objection arises from a perception that interactions between criminal groups and migration authorities are the outcome of intentional collaborations. I think it's important here to understand the extent to which criminal groups are crucial to migration governance, not to overstate intentionality in these interactions. Libya or other case studies may suggest that these collaborations are often characterized by unspoken agreements rather than explicit partnerships. For example, in Libya, the vague nature of European Union policies has reinforced the role of criminal networks in migration governance. Studies have shown how these policies are often, either intentionally or unintentionally, been drafted in a vague, fuzzy manner that favor the interference of different actors, including actors that act outside the rule of law, or anyway in a gray zone. The extent to which this is a deliberate strategy by European Union institutions remain unclear. Of course, we can entertain the possibility that this collaboration can take more explicit and intended forms. Now, Al-Masri is a case in point. It's really hard to say that the Italian government doesn't know anything about that. That was really done, it was really a technical mistake, the reason why this Al-Masri was released. However, what I want to point out here is that whether intentionality is the norm or not is not the primary concern here. What matters is that criminal or criminalized activities can intendedly or unintendedly be instrumental to the legal apparatus of migration governance. And with this, I would conclude.